Good morning, everyone. This is Professor VijayLakshmi. I teach HR and OB at Indian Institute of Management, Rohtak. And today, the webinar topic which I'm going to discuss with all of you is about leading change. It's basically about change management and the leadership required and how to navigate successfully through change management. Okay, so let's begin. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, leading change management. Okay, so I'll just try to hide the panel. Yes. Okay, so I will request, all the attendees, whatever questions you have, if you could take it towards the end, so that, I can finish my presentation in a flow, and I would be more than happy to take your questions towards the end, right? Okay, and so before I begin, I think we all know that change is only static, right? And having said that, so we know how important change is, but at the same time, we also understand that change is complex. Okay, so that's why a discussion on change management and how to lead it effectively is really relevant, and it has always been relevant, and it will always be. And the reason why this is really important as well as complex at the same time is because it involves people. The successful implementation of a change initiative or a change management, the dynamics is all about people. And so that's the reason, and we know all how beautiful people are, but at the same time how complex it is to understand human behavior and relationships. Okay, so how we wish we could lead change. I'll just try to if you could just look at this picture. Okay, you can understand, right? It's all we would all want change to be so easy and well managed and pretty, everything is in order. But how it really is it's basically this. Now, if you look at this picture, I hope you understand, right? Okay, so I'll just move ahead. This was just on a light note, and before I begin, because I started with how important it involves people issues, and therefore how to lead change management also depends on the leadership. So what exactly leadership consists of, according to me, is it's the leadership is all about having a vision and of course doing the task, which like in this case is change initiative and change management, plus taking care of all the relationships involved. So all these three together make an effective leadership quotient, I would say. And a little bit more on that, if we see, if we want to see how change means leadership in the sense, if you can see the graph, it is in terms of interdependence and diversity. Okay, so if it's not change, then what we usually like or what we are comfortable is generally being stable and having a policy and proper management. Okay, and but in this case, diversity is usually less and interdependence is also lower. Now, but when we mean change, which means that it is going to increase in terms of probably organizational politics and power issues, dynamics, the complexities involved, uncertainties, unfolding every step. And of course, the leadership is required when, we change from a kind of status quo and we navigate towards change, okay, which will mean more diversity, more interdependence on each other. And that is, one of the factors which will affect the success rate of a change management initiative. Okay. Now, as I talked about status quo, if you see by the simple graph, I mean, status quo, I mean, everyone wants to be in their comfort zone. But the reality is that, you want to work with the best effective tools possible, make things work, provide coherence. And but status quo, what happens is basically it limits our ability to create, be creative and innovation. Okay, and so if you see the graph, there is a peak point after which even if you put in more inputs, productivity is not going to rise, right? If you can see the graph, it's an S-shaped graph. Okay, so what it basically means is that after a point there is a peak point in terms of productivity which will be reached, but after that, to increase productivity, you need again a change. Okay, a change with more dependency, interdependency, and probably new diversity involved, depending on the context the change is all about. And then only again it will lead to new heights and new peak of productivity. Okay, so status quo is it's good, but it's temporary. It's supposed to be temporary. Okay, so basically what I meant was change is equal to, if in a kind of equation, there are of course benefits of status quo, but as I mentioned, we have to see if the benefits of status quo has reached its peak. If we understand it has reached its peak, then and if we are considering a particular kind of change, a change project or a change initiative, then if the product of them is greater than the benefits of status quo, then of course we should go for a change. Okay, every now and then every change is not, we have to of course evaluate whether change is required in the first place. Okay, so the one way is to evaluate whether the benefits of status quo are less than probable benefits of a successful change that we can predict. Okay, so having understood that, like we understand, like, right, how do we break out of the paradigm of status quo that I just mentioned? Because is it easy? Imagine, status quo, as I told, it's comfort zone. Now, how easy it will be if I tell you all are in good, probably in good places, you're working effectively, you're liking your job, and everything is like almost comfortable, you're all set in your workplaces. And now if I just break your comfort zone, how easy will it be for you to overcome that? Will it be, just imagine, each one of you, in terms of your work, maybe one or two factors which if you can think of right now in your mind, which is really important to you in terms of maybe it's work flexibility, or maybe it's something else, objective at the workplace. Now, if I tell that I remove that, and it will be removed, not just because I remove flexibility, but because maybe a change is going to happen, because of which you might be needed to lose a little bit on flexibility, and probably maybe a new project coming up, and double work shift is involved. Is it going to be easy for you? Okay, it's not. It's a very simple example, but the basic premise is that change is difficult, change is hard, and that's why it's not easy for you as an individual employee to break that paradigm of status quo. Neither it is easy for a leader who's driving, or or a top management team who is driving change management initiative to break the status quo amongst employees. Okay. And so before I proceed with the presentation, I would like you to look at these questions, which I'll be answering in the next slides, in the remaining slides. And these are basically what are the challenge of strategic leadership, defining change management, individual change management, organizational change management, who is involved in managing change, what is the nature of organizational change, and finally, I will also be talking about how can planned organizational change be managed by the leader effectively. Okay, so let's begin. If you see, there are a lot of questions and a lot of information I'm excited to share. So what are the challenges of strategic leadership, if I call? Okay, now it creates a capacity for ongoing strategic change. Now look at that. I mean, that was a bit of maybe a complex sentence. Okay, strategic leadership creates capacity. So let's understand what are the components. Now, if you want a strategic leadership, then what are the things that you have to do for capacity building within your organization? So that is basically, you have to start and think over, deeply in terms of the scratch. what exactly is the organizational purpose or vision, okay? Exploiting and maintaining the organization's core competencies. What is your competitive advantage? What are your core competencies of the organization? You have to begin, why I'm telling, it might sound, a bit not comfortable, but the thing is that, we have come across, many instances in organizations, because there's umpteen number of organizations, and of course everyone is not the best place to work, or they are not best in performance. So what basically I mean is that many times people really we have seen that organizations and the top leaders, owners, they actually don't really have a very clear purpose or vision, which means sometimes it's there on the papers, but actually it's something else. They don't mean it, what's written in the paper, and sometimes it keeps changing. It's confusing. People in the organization are not aware of. So the leader might be having a certain vision, but it's not trickled down to the lowest level. That's not a good indicator. If you have a vision, if you have a mission, if you have objectives for a 1 year, 3 year, or 5 year period, it has to be simple. It has to be simple, as well as the point. Why simple? Because it has to be understood by each and every employee in the organization at all levels and different positions. Then only it means. Otherwise, your any organization's mission and vision and goals and objectives for the it's just not relevant, because it's just on paper. How does it matter if it's not in the minds of the employee? Okay, so and whenever, if a leader is thinking about having a change in the organization, or taking up a project to change, or an initiative, one has to start thinking again. Remember, reinforcing in his or her view what's the purpose or vision, whether this change is the consequences or the probable results which is expected, which I'm thinking about as a leader in terms of the change which I want to initiate, whether it is going to be in alignment with the purpose or vision of the organization, whether how it will be aligned with the core competencies, competitive advantage of the organization, and what about the human capital that we have in the organization, whether how much in terms of support, or how much will be the resistance. I should know these many questions. Okay, sustaining an effective organizational culture, how will it the change that I'm going to, how difficult or easy will it be to sync it with the current culture in the organization, or what changes I will be needing to make it. Okay, and then about ethical practices. Similarly, the controls, very important. Many times we forget, organizational controls are very equally important. Remember, control is important. It's not good leadership or strategic leadership is not, or good management is just not about saying the goody things which you read about in papers, engagement, and this, and flexibility and diversity. Of course, these are needed, I understand, but it has to be balanced with organizational controls which are planned effectively. Okay, they have to be aligned. So it's basically in one hand you have autonomy and freedom, and the other hand you have responsibility and controls to to balance it. It's very important. So in a change initiative, a leader must think about how the person will be, how the leader, or how the top management team will be controlling during the when the initiative, what will be the problems and how will it be controlled. That foresight has to be there. Otherwise, things are going to might get haywire. I'm not saying going to, but yeah, might get. Okay, so next, a little bit more on the strategic leadership. So remember, I talked about status quo and the components for strategic leadership. These are the basics. Anytime important decision a leader is making, you have to think on these points. Sacrosanct. Okay, it has to be thought about in your mind. Okay, and not just in mind, you have to actually work it out for bringing in alignment. But beyond that, remember status quo. So what happens? So you have to, you don't want the you don't want the graph to, plunge down, right? In terms of the productivity for the organization. I'm assuming this, any leader will want this. So what you have to do is you have to break the change, status quo. So what do you do generally? It's through innovation, right? Innovation of products, services. It can be people, policies, internal innovations, and so on. So it's basically about being more creative, being about more innovative. Okay, so sustainable competitive advantage somewhere definitely lies in the creativity, innovation of each and every organization. Okay, so creativity, and basically we all understand what creativity is the generation of a novel idea or unique approach to solving problems and crafting opportunities. Okay, creativity is not always, doesn't need to be in the organizational context. Generally we think creativity, it's not about only artistic. It's in the organizational, in the workplace context. It's also about generating new ideas, new approaches of solving problems, decision making, and creating more opportunities, and so on. And of course, the next level of creativity is generally innovation. Is when you put that ideas to life. It's basically implements certain ideas. Some ideas do get success in terms of getting at the innovation stage, and when they are put into practice. Okay. Now, the next question is a little bit. We got an understanding about strategic, the basic leadership components of what you have to actually think when you're considering change initiatives. Now, the next question is, what is before we begin the strategies? I have the strategies, different problems when you face when leading a change. But like, what is the nature of organizational change in the first place? So let's look at that. So if you want to be a change leader, a change, you have to be a change agent who takes leadership responsibility. Okay, and it's all about bringing a change in the existing status quo environment of the organization. It can be for the entire system, it can be for a particular department, it can be particular maybe just for a group of people or just one person. It depends. Okay, so but basically you have to be change agent. And if you can you can read this point, the role is definitely not easy. Okay, the role of the change agent. And if you're a good change agent, then only your leadership in terms of leading change is going to be applauded. Now, so what will it need for a good change agent to be? It's basically, you have, apart from taking the responsibility for changing, you have to be forward looking. You have to have the foresight as well as forward looking. You have to be proactive, and you have to embrace new ideas. Now, having said that, it might sound very easy and simple, but think deeply. Are these points really easy and to work out? Think in your own workplaces. How many people are forward looking? How many people embrace new ideas actually? Okay, if you think deeply in your own experiences so far, you'll find, of course, I hope definitely each one of you do have some, some positive answers to this. But definitely we also know that it's not an easy ball game, because there are so many resistances and people who will challenge any person challenging the status quo. Okay, so now a little bit more about how it is different from status quo managers versus change leaders and change agents. Okay, what I talked about. So for a change leader, you have to be, of course, confidence has to be there, and that will only come if you have you really are good in knowledge, and your skills and ability, of course, will be confident. Okay, and confidence in this context would also come in the context when you really understand why the change is needed, how it is going to be beneficial, not only for the organization, but also each and every employee, or whatever the change is being targeted at. Okay, so these two things are very important. You need to know why the need is there for the change, and how it will benefit. Okay, and the maximum stakeholders you can rope in terms of benefits, accrued benefits possibly, which you can predict. The better, the easier the change, the process, or the smoother the change process is going to be. Okay, now willing to take risks. Of course, we know risks have to be there. It's basically, of course, any change initiative. I mean, there is a risk that it might fail, and certain problems and consequences and all that. So of course, any initiative for that matter, risk is there, and only people who can take risk can become leaders. And opportunity, you should be able to so for a good change leader, change leadership, you should have the ability to spot the opportunity. When is the right opportunity, or if there is an opportunity, and when is the right opportunity to have a change or a particular kind of change in the organization. Okay, and and of course the usual skills of making things, driving work, making work done and all that, people management skills, the basic people management skills will come into place. I'm not going to talk about in details. Yeah, so, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So next, if you have these skills as a change leader, then you have to promote and actively support. It's very important, right? See why it's important. You might have a great plan, right, of a change plan. Maybe you have a great need. It's going to hit it in the right spot, okay? But now, and you want the change to happen, right? But is it possible for you to alone as a leader, make the change successful in the organization? No, it's not possible. So what do? You have to actively support the people whom, you have to take active participation of people. Okay, you have to promote them. You have to promote through your communication. You have to promote the change initiative itself, and also support the others involved to, if you want to have an effective, successful change management. That, these all things, sometimes it can also lead to, creativity and innovation results. And but on the other hand, status quo managers, who are they, which are unlike, change leaders, they of course, they are not comfortable with change. They love status quo, and they are not comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, probably in terms of what might be the consequence of this initiative if I take, what if I fail, what my subordinates or what my, superiors will think about, if I'm not confident. And these typical kind of hesitations, and of course predictability will be preferred, because the tried and tested games or the routes will be followed. And even if sometimes good managers, they are good. It's not that status quo managers are not good. They're doing good work, okay? But it's just that they differ from change leaders or change agents. Now, sometimes they do sense an opportunity or a need for a change, but then many times it happens they'll just sit over it and let it depend on time. So if someone else takes it up, or or they wait for it to come from the top management, they are too scared to even share the idea, and so on. Okay, there's so many hesitations and inhibitions at the individual level. So this slide I just try to explain difference between basics between change leaders and status quo managers. Now, quickly, let's go to what change management itself is. Since we are talking about change, it's basically the process, the tools, and techniques to manage people side of change to achieve the required business results. Anyone? So this definition, of course, is one of my favorites, and of course, this is not the only definition. There are different definitions of change management, but this definition emphasizes the people side of change. Okay, and like I started, change is all about. It involves taking people along to have an initiative, and definitely a change initiative. You need even more efforts and support from people. Okay, so that's why whatever you do to manage people, the different myriad ways and tools and processes you use to manage the people side in terms of in the context of any change initiative, and of course which is geared towards improved organizational performance. So that is all about change management. It's all about how you manage people during change. Okay, so now a little bit more about change. And so organizational change that we were talking about is actually, it can be represented in three states simply, the current or the status quo state, the transition state, okay, and the future state. Okay, now basically current state is, it's all about how things are being done today in the present time. Transition is basically where the change initiative is going to happen. Okay, it's basically how to move from the current to future. Okay, and all the efforts of the change plan is going to be implemented, and it's in the transition state. And finally, there will be a future state if it's successfully or not successfully, whatever, but there will be a future state where how things will be done tomorrow, okay? Now, example, it's just some examples like ad hoc processes, how you can change. The current state can be, example in ad hoc processes you have in organizations. So you can change it to being, in a much documented, managed process, like multiple legacy systems, you can have one integrated database. It's simple changes. Organizations are making changes. Change management is not about all these dramatic changes which will come in the in the first page of news dailies. It's not that. Okay, so suppose they're generalists in the call center, then probably you also recruit specialists in the calls, and that's also simple change. Okay, interface for suppliers, and so it's simple little things. They're all part of change. Okay, now of course, and what we knew about change, one of the most popular ones is of course in the context of mergers and acquisitions, right? And yeah, we understand that change and how difficult it is, and what are the consequences at the larger level. Okay, now in reality, actually, organization and individual, remember, organization is entity, we considered it, but ultimately it is made up of individuals, right? So the change process that is happening is of course at two levels. One is the organization that we talked about. There is a current state and there is a future, and between is a change initiatives during the transition. Similarly, at the individual level also, there's a current state of how individuals or employees were doing work today. Okay, and then there will be transition state when we are required to make certain changes as part of the change process being implemented. And finally, of course, there will be future state where after that process, where how actually again I'll be doing my work. Okay, if you see what I talked about, the organization is built with, it's all about individuals together form an organization. Okay, so this diagram is just demonstrating the same, that it is an integration or amalgamation of several individuals going through changes and the transitions at their own level, and together, if they are all in sync and in synergy and get towards a common objective, finally there will be an organizational level change, a successful organization level change. Okay, now of course, already I talked about like change management. It's all about getting to some common organizational objective in place. Okay, so it's and that's why. But since it is made through individuals, it's important for us to understand how to support the individuals. If individuals are supported, if the leader has a focus on each and every individual, how it's going to affect the change, then it should, so basically the approach should be bottom up and probably not top down, because many times in the top down approach we forget, or we don't get into the intricate details of how it's any change effort or initiative being taken in the organization is actually going to affect at the grassroots level. Okay, so now if you start working it backward right from the beginning, you'll have much more understanding, and if you have more understanding, you will plan it better, so that there will be more effective and efficient results. Okay, and why it is, again I'm stressing why it is important to consider individuals, because remember, the change is not going to happen on its own, and if it's not managed well, what is it's going to happen? There is going to be a lot of resistance. Okay, so example, lower productivity, resistance, active, passive. Okay, and disinterest, and arguments, and typical those grapevines and gossips in place about changes being made. So it's always better, instead of that, if you make changes more clear, more visible, and transparent to everyone in terms of why this change is being done and how it's going to benefit. So instead of that, it's always good to be clear, communicate well, involve everyone, okay, to have a greater change management effectiveness. Okay, now individual and organizational perspective, which I've already talked about. Now, I talked about the top-down change. Now, what is the top-down change? Like strategic and comprehensive change that is initiated with the goals of comprehensive impact on the organization. So basically, it is driven by top management, right? In simple terms. Okay, and of course, if they have decided on a particular change initiative, it's of course it's strategically decided, and we assume that, of course, and it is driven by the top leadership, and success depends on middle and lower level workers. Remember, the top team might be planning a change in the best possible way. They might have the best plans and strategy in place, but success depends on how it is implemented, how it is supported by middle levels and how it is implemented by the lower level. Okay, now instead of that, the bottom up change, like I was talking about, is basically, change can come from any part of the organization, not just the top management. Okay, now many times it happens, like good companies, there are several cases we know where change, there have been employees put up ideas and ideas are taken up, they're innovative ideas, sometimes they're change ideas. So it's basically talking about that. And they are crucial, obviously, if they are important to the organizational welfare and well-being and performance, it is taken seriously. But then finally, to make it a success, what is important, because it is coming somewhere from the employee base, it's basically you have to, of course, involve them, take their participation, give them empowerment to actually at the individual level, they themselves are leaders in their own space in terms of navigating the change. Okay. Now, we talk about integrated change leadership. Now, this is interestingly, a mixed approach. If you can, think about in simple terms, it's basically successful enduring change combines advantages of both top-down and bottom-up. So, top-down, of course, breaks up traditional patterns, implements difficult economic adjustments. So, example, top-down usually is people, the top management, they might not have thought so much how it is going to affect them each and employee level. So instead of that, leaders can try to break the traditional pattern of top-down approach in planning a change. And and from the bottom up, of course, instead of just getting their ideas worked upon, they should also have the objective of how, or the overall broad perspective of how it is going to help in terms of the overall building of the organization, the knowledge management in the organization, and the knowledge capital building in the organization, and how sustainable, so bottom up, remember, if you involve more bottom up, the change is going to be more sustained. It's going to be probably easier, not always, but definitely sustenance point of view, bottom up approach, you have to have certain elements of that, and top down, of course, it has its own pros and cons. Okay. Now, again, some little bit more theoretical. Let's move quickly in terms of what is the nature of organizational change. So again, it can be transformational and incremental. They're two very different kinds. Okay, transformational example, like I talked about in the case of example, mergers and acquisitions. Incremental, it can be small little changes, initiatives in any office or workplace or organization. Now again, it can be unplanned as well as planned. Now planned, of course, is sometimes, so many times every change initiative, particularly the incremental changes, are not always planned change. It's not possible. Okay, but definitely most of the planned changes, the transformational ones are always a planned change. Okay, generally they are not unplanned. Generally, okay, the transformational change, unless it is, the change is happening because of external forces in the on the organization. We'll come to some forces that I'm talking about in the in the later slides. Okay. So, but how to lead transformational change? Okay, so the basic steps, this is basically the Porter's 8-step model, and that's one of the most popular models model of organizational change. It basically talks about establishing a sense of urgency for change. Okay, urgency in the sense you understand the need, but then you communicate in a way that everyone understands why it's important and urgent. That is what it's basically about, the urgency for the change. Form powerful coalition to lead the change. Coalition in terms, you have to have a group, in the beginning, thought leaders for that particular, change initiative, which are going to take more responsibility, and so and they are important in terms of getting support from other, people in the organization, and then of course create and communication the entire vision, and not just the need. So vision, basically the entire change plan. and how it's going to affect, what will be the problems and what will be the benefits, both in your communication, why it is needed. Already you can also communicate clearly, what might be the problems that you'll go through, how to overcome that, how to cope with that, and of course, finally, what the benefit will be, okay? So empower others to move change forward, and of course, empower the employees and others involved in the organization, particularly in that particular change effort. Empowering means giving them support, resources if it's needed for in the context of that particular change. Celebrate short-term wins and recognize those who help. Yeah, this is very important. You should not wait till the end result of a change in terms of final evaluation of whether the change is successful or not. But even during, during the stages of implementation, if you can see good work, good efforts being put up, and some uh, objectives being met already in the way, so you should be highlighting that, recognizing employees in terms of and basically this is a point where you can celebrate the change agents, the change leaders. Now, build on success, align people and systems with new ways. Of course, once you start getting some aspects of I would say benefits accruing in from your change program, then of course you have to align it with other systems in place, and build on the success, get more and more participation involvement, okay, more reinforcing it through communication more, and finally stay with it, keep the message consistent, champion the vision. You remember, again, communication, I'm stressing on the communication, keep the message consistent. It's also important, whatever you started with, it's important not to change it, okay? Stay with it, keep on continuing the communication, and celebrating the short wins. So finally, to champion the vision of the change program. This is a quarter's basic 8-step model of organizational change. Okay, now, like I talked about, what are the external forces of change? So, globalization, market competition, sometimes government laws, regulations, technological developments, market trends. And I can, talk more in details on each of these points with giving you examples, but I would like to skip because I hope you can understand the examples on your own. And because lack of time, I'll try to, because I have to complete the slides. I don't want I want you to, myself to share with whatever points I have. So there are external forces for change, and of course, there are internal forces of change. When you understand, when the employees or when the top management, they understand that they need to change. It might be in the culture, it might be in particular policy, it might be in the product, service, and so on. Okay. Now, and generally, these are like I talked about, it can be culture, it can be technology change, it can be structure of the organization. You want to change that, okay? You want to change sometimes people. So example, large scale downsizing, that's also kind of change that you're, and which is very, very difficult. And sometimes, of course, there are changes related to tasks, the operations in place as well. Okay. Now, so how, we talked about a lot about what are the different kinds of changes, but how can it be managed effectively? Okay, so again, this is a very famous, 3-step model of plans change, which is unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. Okay, now if you see that in the unfreezing stage, it's basically, the task of the leader is to, like I talked about, if you connected with the 8-step quarters model, you have to create a need for change. Okay, in the changing, now in the phase 2, which is actual, actually the change process is happening there, where you are actually implementing the change. Okay, and finally, refreezing it is basically it's closure of the change. You have to stabilize the change. You have to build sustainability into the change that that has been brought about. Okay, so it's basically simple unfreezing, changing, and refreezing stage. Now, in the phase 1, again, if I talk about that preparation of change or the unfreezing stage, you have to, of course, understand what your strategy is, plan it. You have to have your team in place. Okay, you have to have your model. How to get sponsorship in terms of, suppose it can be employees. Suppose if I talk about a particular department or employee, a group of employees or a self. Sometimes there are interest groups in organizations. They may, needing or demanding a change. Then you have to have sponsorship from the top, management. from the CEO. So that is what sponsorship is all about. So you have to understand the change, you have to have the group in place, and you have to identify what will be the risks, what will be the challenges, and how we will be coping with. So all that planning has to happen in the art phasing stage itself. Finally, of course, then the next, the most important critical is actually the change process, the phase, like I talked about. And in this phase, communication is very important. Okay, and the training, equally, if needed, some coaching training to employees, because if they are part of the change plan. And of course, the resistance management plan, if you can see the last point, very interesting. It's always expect that there are some people who are going to challenge, who are going to question, who are going to show resistance, both active, passive. You should understand why it might be and how to solve it. So you should have a resistance management plan in place from beforehand. Okay, then the final, the unfreezing stage, or the reinforcing stage, or the sustaining stage, you can call. It's basically about how to close the gaps and collect feedback, improve whatever processes were initiated during the change, how to improve it, because there will be gaps, there will be feedbacks, there will be room for improvement. Okay, corrective actions, and of course, and not to forget, celebrate the success. Okay. Now, a little bit on, let's talk about who is involved in managing change. We understand, of course, change managers, like I talked about, it's all about people. So it will be senior, the top management, the middle management, the employees. Sometimes there are separate projects for that, or there are employees which are not on the regular payroll. So they are like project team, or you can give another term. So but there are different groups of people in the organization, and they have their own unique roles, and you have to have support. So example, okay, in the case of senior leaders, you have to understand what their role is, how they can maximize their capabilities and abilities, their leadership in helping out the change project. Okay, and how they, because, and in terms of communication, they will play a very important role, and so on. Okay, in terms of coalition building, they are important. On the other hand, managers or the middle management, their importance is more in terms of driving the employees, because generally they are also the line managers. Okay, so giving constant, they are the link between the employee and the top management. So in terms of giving feedback, remember, feedback is not only the end, towards the end, that you take a feedback. Every step during the change management, there has to be a dynamic and iterative feedback loop to the top management, so that for effective management, successfully managing the change. And that role is very important for the middle management and the managers or supervisors that you call. Okay, and they're also important in terms of training and the people, empowering the people, ensuring that everyone is involved, and getting their participation. The middle management plays a more important role in these aspects. And of course, employees, not to forget, they are actually the drivers of the change. They are going to implement the change at the ground level. And so it's important in terms of how true feedback they give, and what are their reactions, and what are their problems. So and project team, sometimes, of course, if they are there, and you can have sometimes organizations have change management team in place. So of course, there can be different separate special groups to have their own roles and responsibilities to support the change management. Again, if you can also divide, whenever you make a change initiative at place for any leader, you can also divide the entire members of the organization to three different groups. One is a committed core group. Okay, one is the middle group, I can call, and one is of course, the third group is, which is going to be the active resistance, who will be resisting your change initiative. Okay, so this way also you can group, remember, and that's why it's important that you know that there will be these three kind of groups. So you should have a strategy in place already, how to effectively deal with them, and to maximize the benefit in terms of getting success in your change efforts. Okay, so the committed group, of course, since they are already committed, you are on the same plane probably with the change agent or with the change management team. Okay, and what you have to reinforce is how they will be benefiting, how they can identify with the change, and they are participative. And so it's basically, okay, when you are working with a core group or the committed group, okay, you have to maximize their engagement. That is what I was talking about, okay, and understand that. And then there is the middle or the muddle group, which is going to be the passive resistors, I would say, not active but passive resistors. Now, what you have to, if you're working or with the muddle group in terms of the change, then you have to, remember, you have to each and every step, actively you have to seek their participation. Always ensure that if there are any problems or issues from that group, because they're the passive resistors, remember. Okay, and if you can see from the slide, you have to train them and teach them, reinforce your communication more, compared with the core group, the committed group, which is already probably part of the change management initiative. There you don't need to always reinforce every now and then. Now, finally, the third group is, of course, the distant detractors. Of course, they don't see value in the change. They'll be questioning the change if you are making the change, if you are the leader, and they will be attached to the SQ. SQ is, by the way, the status quo. Okay, so of course, there will be people who would like the old ways, sometimes because of their own personal benefits, sometimes just because people don't like change. And they cannot understand the benefits, and they'll be judgmental. Okay, and so that's why what you have to do is ask questions, to understand them, because just mere convincing will not help this group of detractors, which will be, this group will detract you from your change, successful change effectiveness. So decide among them. Also, it's not always possible for you to take care of each and every member of such groups. So you have to understand which are more problematic or which are more important, so that you can change them into at least the middle model group, if not the committed core group. Okay, you can develop individual plans for each, and you have to be high in emotional intelligence, particularly with this group. That is what it's all about. Remember, I talked in the beginning that leadership is, one of the core competencies, set of competencies for effective leadership and also for change leadership is people management skills, which of course involves a lot about emotional intelligence. Okay, so do not ignore attacks, the wisdom, investing more time with this group. So yeah, there are different strategies. Now, interestingly, if you see this, chart, the results, this is basically, the different stages of a, planned change process. And if you see the figures, of course, thankfully, the figure is in a, you can see the graph, plunging towards the right side, and highest is, of course, you have to start the change management at the initiation stage. Thankfully, there is no doubt in this, but you can see the differences should end it. So, and there's a big gap between who actually started, planned change management at the initial stage. It's 40%, and more than double of that people think that it should be started, but actually implementing at the initial stage changes are only 40% reported. So, so you can understand and remember initiation and planning stage, how it is important. So, even before designing and implementation, so you can understand there is a gap between what still, even if people understand they are not doing it. So we should understand, where are the inertia in place. Remember, in the change process, inertia is going to be very high in the organization, and you have to overcome that. Okay, and I've already talked about why reasons, why people resist change. Okay, because people inherently, it's basic human nature that you will not like ambiguity, uncertainty. Most of the people, and the fear of the unknown. Because they understand it will disrupt their current system, and probably they are not confident. Probably they fear they will lose control, and it will, suppose it will change their basics in place, example times and schedules and so on, probably increase or workload, and and they are probably sometimes people don't support change programs, because remember, that's why I'm talking why communication is important, why to involve them, because they don't see why it's important. Now, if you, any sane individual, if you don't understand the logic, you are not going to just blindly follow that. You cannot expect anyone to do that. Okay, so that is it all about. And what you have to do in terms of, there will be resistance. How do you do that? So there are different strategies, like, the education, the training, the communication part of it, right? In the beginning stages, then taking their participation, involvement, facilitating, or empowering of the employees, supporting them, uh, taking the agreement, reinforcing what your vision communication is, and again taking the feedback and all that, manipulation. And by the way, the last 2 points, it's the difficult one. Remember, I talked about control. Sometimes change leadership is also about and not all leaders, we all know they're different kind of leaders, so therefore different kinds of change leadership also. So many times we know about narcissist personalities and so on, different in the dark traits in personality and the kind of leadership. So similarly, if that kind of leader is there, then the change leader, the change management process is also, the change leadership, the way that person will be leading change is also going to be different. So the last two strategies applies in those contexts, and which is also very common, by the way. It's all about manipulating and cooptation and sometimes coercion, passive and sometimes passively or implicitly, and sometimes explicitly coercions is there. Okay, so that's a hard reality. Okay, so like I was talking about the fourth coercion strategy of change. So how do, you might be thinking, how is it possible? It is very common. So, because, legitimate power base is used. Remember, power base is, it's basically about, see, if you have authority, you have position, the positional power, there's a concept in organizational behavior. So if you have the authority, yes, you have the positional power, you can abuse it and you can use it because you have the sanctioned legitimacy of that power to have a coercive strategy of change in place. You can. Okay, so similarly, in terms of rewards, punishments, many different leaders have, we have history supporting this. We know how leaders have been coercive in making changes. Okay, and and why people coerce, and instead of not making them understand, or taking the involvement and taking them along in terms of the change process, making them change agents. And it's because sometimes they, inherent these kind of leadership, these kind of strategies, if you employ, it means that you basically inherently believe that employees are only driven by the self-interest, which I think it's debatable, right? Okay, it's so if you have this basic idea that each and every employee who's working, they will be self-motivated and they have their own self-interest, and they will never, at the first hand, think about the organizational benefit or the welfare, then of course, in these situations, if this is a strong belief, that people definitely more often than not they get into these strategies. Okay. um, Now the next one, if you see the rational, sometimes there's rational persuasion. So one is of course the extreme end was, force coercion. Then there's rational coercion. So, and this is also very very common. In fact, more and more leaders do that. They try to persuade it rationally. Okay, and expert power. Remember, there are four different kinds of power bases. One is positional power, one is expert power, one is personal power, and the fourth is power which you derive because of your network and centrality of the position. Okay, or not your position, some other position. Okay, so different for the first one, coercive of course is because of the positional power. This one, rational, is more because of your expert power and your personal power. Okay, expert. So if people trust you that you have knowledgeability, skills in terms of your work, in terms of the person you are, you have a track record, there's credibility, yes, it's easier for you to persuade people in terms of getting along, in terms of and supporting your change effort and initiative. So for a leader, yeah, persuasion strategy many times helps also. Okay, and then the shared power strategy. Of course, this is a different kind of leadership. We know there, the authentic leadership in place. There's a supportive leadership. So if that is a style of the person involved in, or person leading the change, then this is more of a collaborative process, like I was mostly talking about, in terms of driving the change management in place. Okay. Now, if you see this, it's kind of summarizing it, force and the rational and the shared power. If you see, um, and the power bases, remember I talked about. Okay, reference power is that what I was talking about, the network and the centrality issues are there. Okay, and power because of rewards and punishment that the authority or the position power gives you. Okay, and you can see the shared power, there'll be participation. Rational is basically more about through information, and you get maximum benefits because of that. And in the forced strategy, of course, it's basically it's all about direct active actions in place. Okay, so but if you see the last column, that's most that's a key takeaway from this. If you can remember this, it's basically you can have all three kinds of strategies in terms of making the change, but in the force or in the coercive styles, if you can see into the continuum, it will be faster, but commitment will be low. Okay, and temporary compliance. Now, if you, I'm not saying this any particular strategy is bad or good. Sometimes some people they use equally each one of them depending on the context situation. So suppose if it's a temporary, you don't need sustenance in a particular change. Okay, and it's for a temporary phase or it's urgently needed, then maybe you have to adopt the force or coercion style of change. Okay, it will be faster, but of course commitment will be low, and since commitment is low, of course it's not going to be sustainable. On the other extreme end, you have the shared power, where of course through participation you have initiated a change and you have navigated the change. So of course it's just going to take a lot of time because it involves more people, because by this sheer logic, and but it will be high in commitment, and it will be internalized in the system, in the organization. It will be sustained. So you have to understand which kind of change initiative, what is a final objective that you're looking on. Sometimes you have to take the strategy of change according to that. Okay. So now finally, if I talk about, like, so basically that's what I was trying to tell, is that you have to understand people, your ideas. I can, as a change leader, have my ideas, but remember, them or the employees, their means employees, they'll be having anxiety because it's not their idea. Now if it's not their idea, they don't understand it, why, and also how, and then what the consequences will be. All these questions are there. So so if I quickly tell about the change leadership checklist, in the end, to summarize, of course, you have to be aware not just about self, about others, that basic emotional intelligence that I was talking about. Then also awareness, by the way, here I should also include awareness, that sensing the opportunity. Awareness of the situation should also be there. If you have this, you will understand there is a need. Now, if you understand there is a need, you have to align it with if there is a need in terms of, you have to align, you have to plan the change, and you have to align it with the culture and the strategies in place. And finally, you have to take action. Remember, small steps, participation. If you need long-term, of course, sustainable change in the organization, then yes, it starts with small steps and planning it effectively. And and finally, of course, communication is not the final stage. It's going to be important in each of the stage of the the cycle that I've talked about in the quarter model and in the other models. So communication, coherence, inspiration, and direction. Remember, there are three very different components of communication. Coherence, whatever you started with, why it is particular change needed, and how it's going to benefit others, and what will be the problems. Okay, that has to be the same. Okay, you can't change that. You have to inspire others, why to support the change. Okay, how it's going to benefit them, that is what is going to inspire others. And of course, direction has to be there, because just now, if people understand, your people is going to understand, okay, this change is needed, and okay, and this is how it's relevant and important. But then on their own, it's not everyone's cup of tea to navigate the change. You have to give direction, which is very important. And in your communication, you have to be very clear how each and every employee will be needed in terms of participation. What will be their roles? What will be the changes? How will be they coping up? What will be the resources provided? How they can ensure that? How to provide feedback, and so on. All this is coming under direction part of the communication, which has to be there in every stage. Finally, I end my presentation. It's basically, if you see the quote, interestingly, this is from the 16th century. So what I was talking about, how change is difficult, it's not new. So if you read it, there's nothing more difficult to carry out, not more doubtful of success, not more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. Okay, so I think it's from time immemorial, change has been tough and hard, but as I started, change is the only constant. We shouldn't be afraid of change. We should understand when it's important to change, but what is the right time to change, plan it well and execute it well for getting success. Okay, basically you have to be broad, adaptive, other directed. Basically, if it's, remember, this is in terms of the long term change I'm talking about. If you need a long term change in your organization, sustainable change, then remember it has to be broad in terms of how it is affecting, benefiting everyone. It has to be adaptive. You should have the direction how people can adapt and participate. It has to be other directed. It has to be owned. The ownership has to be there. If people are inspired, they will be supporting it. In fact, not just supporting, directing it, demanding it. So if as a leader you can demand a change through your followers or employees, of course that change is the effectiveness is going to be really at a different level. And of course it has to be purposeful at from different perspectives, from the organization, from the employees, from the society. And if you can ensure all the aspects being covered in terms of the purpose, of course you have a great change initiative at place and you can ensure the success of it also. Okay, thank you.